Don't forget to check the Community tab for more information and insight. Please consider a like and subscribe, thank you. Our story begins with Kathleen Kane. In 2016, Kathleen Kane, the former Attorney General of Pennsylvania, was sentenced to prison for perjury, obstruction of justice, and abuse of her office. Kane was accused of leaking grand jury information to the media and then lying about it under oath. Kane was the first woman to be elected Attorney General in Pennsylvania, and she served from 2013 to 2016. Before she was elected Attorney General, Kane worked as an assistant district attorney in Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania. Kane's downfall began when she launched an investigation into the handling of the Jerry Sandusky child sex abuse case by state officials, including former Attorney General Tom Corbett. As part of her investigation, Kane leaked confidential grand jury information to a reporter in an attempt to embarrass a political rival. She later lied about her actions under oath. Kane's trial was a high-profile affair that included testimony from numerous political insiders and journalists. In the end, she was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to 10 to 23 months in prison. Kane's case sparked controversy and debate about the role of attorneys general in investigating other state officials, as well as the ethics of leaking confidential information to the media. Kane was released from prison after serving just over 8 months of her sentence, and she has since been attempting to rebuild her life and career. After exhausting all her appeal efforts, Kathleen Kane began serving her prison sentence of 10 to 23 months at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility on November 29, 2018. She was eventually released on July 31, 2019. However, on April 30, 2022, Kane was taken into custody once again for allegedly violating her probation by driving under the influence. In March 2022, Kathleen Kane was arrested for driving under the influence, DUI, after getting involved in a car accident roughly 3 miles away from her residence in Scranton. She failed a field sobriety test and declined to take a breathalyzer test. Subsequently, she voluntarily admitted herself to an addiction recovery center and remained there for 45 days. However, since the DUI incident was deemed a violation of her probation, she was incarcerated after completing her treatment. In May, a judge revoked her probation and ordered treatment. Our next criminal offender is Dan Morales. In 2003, Dan Morales, the former Attorney General of Texas, was sentenced to prison for tax evasion and mail fraud. Morales had been accused of accepting bribes from tobacco companies to settle a lawsuit against them. In the Dan Morales case, Morales was the Attorney General of Texas from 1991 to 1999. He was indicted by a federal grand jury in December 2003 on charges of mail fraud and tax evasion in connection with a scheme to receive $520 million in legal fees from the state's settlement with tobacco companies in 1998. Morales was accused of hiring private lawyers to help the state of Texas win the lawsuit against the tobacco industry and then conspiring to keep a portion of the settlement funds for himself. He was alleged to have used his position as Attorney General to steer the contract to his friends and business partners, who in turn paid him a portion of the proceeds. Morales initially denied any wrongdoing, but in March 2003, he pleaded guilty to mail fraud and tax evasion charges as part of a plea bargain with federal prosecutors. In exchange for his guilty plea, the government agreed to drop 10 other charges against him and to recommend a reduced sentence. Morales was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison in February 2004 and was ordered to pay $9 million in restitution. He was released from prison in 2007 after serving more than 3 years of his sentence. The case was seen as a major scandal in Texas politics and led to significant changes in the way the state contracts with private lawyers. Next on the dirty elected official, who turned out to be a Hippocratic douchebag.
So much of it is a half-truth or a non-truth. And there are so many charlatans out in the world that are trying to continue to victimize.
Mark Dan. In 2009, Mark Dan, the former Attorney General of Ohio, resigned from office after a scandal involving sexual harassment and financial impropriety. Dan was later charged with perjury, campaign finance violations, and ethics violations. The Mark Dan case was a major political scandal that rocked Ohio in 2008. Dan was the Attorney General of Ohio at the time and was accused of using his position to engage in various unethical and illegal activities. One of the most scandalous details of the case was the revelation that Dan had an extramarital affair with one of his staffers. This affair reportedly led to tension and dysfunction in the Attorney General's office, with Dan's mistress allegedly receiving preferential treatment and promotions over other staffers. Dan was also accused of misusing state resources for personal purposes, such as using state vehicles for personal travel and using state funds to pay for lavish office renovations. He was further accused of creating a hostile work environment and engaging in other forms of misconduct, including intimidating and retaliating against whistleblowers. The scandal eventually led to Dan's resignation as Attorney General and to numerous investigations and lawsuits against him and his office. The case was seen as a major embarrassment for Ohio politics and led to increased scrutiny of political corruption and misconduct in the state. Here are 10 things you should know about Mark Dan. Mark Dan was the first Democrat to be elected Attorney General in Ohio in 16 years, but his tenure was marred by scandal. Dan's affair with one of his staffers reportedly began just weeks after he was sworn into office. The staffer in question, Jessica Utovich, was married at the time of the affair and later divorced her husband. Dan reportedly gave Utovich preferential treatment in the office, leading to tension and resentment among other staffers. Dan's misuse of state resources included using state vehicles for personal travel, including trips to the airport to visit his girlfriend in Chicago. The office renovations paid for with state funds included a secret room behind a bookcase that Dan used as his personal retreat. Dan's office was also accused of hiring unqualified staffers, including one who had been convicted of forgery. The scandal eventually led to Dan's resignation in 2008, less than 2 years into his term. Dan pleaded guilty to 2 misdemeanor ethics violations and was sentenced to 500 hours of community service. The scandal led to a major shakeup of Ohio's political landscape, with many calling for increased transparency and accountability in government. Grant Woods. In 1984, Grant Woods, the former Attorney General of Arizona, was arrested for driving under the influence. Woods later went on to become a prominent political commentator and advisor. Grant Woods, who served as Arizona's Attorney General from 1991 to 1999, has a personal history with driving under the influence. In 1984, Woods was arrested and charged with DUI after he was pulled over by police in Tempe. According to news reports, Woods had a blood alcohol content of 0.14%, which is above the legal limit of 0.08% in Arizona. Woods pleaded guilty to the charge and received a sentence of probation and community service. Despite his DUI conviction, Woods continued to have a successful career in politics and law. He served as Chief of Staff to Senator John McCain and was widely seen as a rising star in the Republican Party. Attorney General misconduct is a serious issue that can undermine public trust in the justice system. Several high-profile cases have involved attorney generals engaging in illegal and unethical behavior, including driving under the influence, misusing public funds, and abusing their power to intimidate and harass others. Some of the most notorious cases include those of Kathleen Kane, Dan Morales, and Mark Dan. Key points: attorney generals hold a significant amount of power and responsibility, which can be abused if not held accountable. Misconduct by attorney generals can include criminal acts, such as driving under the influence, as well as unethical behavior, such as using public funds for personal gain or engaging in political retaliation. Several high-profile cases of attorney general misconduct have been reported in recent years, including those of Kathleen Kane, Dan Morales, and Mark Dan. Public records, including campaign finance reports, court records, and government documents, can help ensure accountability for attorney generals and other public officials. It is essential for the public to hold attorney generals and other public officials accountable for their actions to maintain the integrity of the justice system and uphold the rule of law. Closing thoughts. Attorney general misconduct is a serious issue that must be addressed to maintain public trust in the justice system. By holding attorney generals accountable for their actions and using public records to ensure transparency, the public can help ensure that justice is served and the rule of law is upheld.